Sophia had never imagined her life would take such a dramatic turn. Just a year ago, she was sitting in a cold, gray prison cell, counting down the days until her release. She wasn't a hardened criminal, just a woman who made a series of poor choices in a desperate situation. Life had dealt her a rough hand, and she played it as best she could, but it still landed her behind bars. When she finally got out, she was determined to start fresh, no matter how difficult it would be. But now, standing in the opulent foyer of a mansion that seemed like something out of a movie, she couldn't help but feel like she was in the middle of some bizarre dream. The day had started like any other. Sophia, now working as a delivery driver for a local courier service, was making her usual rounds. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was honest work, and it paid the bills. She had spent months trying to find a job after her release, and the rejections had worn her down. Finally, the courier company gave her a chance, and she was determined not to mess it up. She kept her head down, did her job, and tried not to draw too much attention to herself. On this particular day, she was driving through one of the wealthier neighborhoods in the city, where the houses were more like mansions, and the lawns were meticulously manicured. She often wondered what it would be like to live in one of those grand homes, but she quickly pushed those thoughts aside. That kind of life wasn't for someone like her. She was just grateful to be out of prison and on the right path. As she pulled up to one of the massive homes, she heard a panicked scream. It was the kind of sound that made your blood run cold, a cry of pure terror. Without thinking, Sophia slammed on the brakes and jumped out of her van. She followed the sound, her heart pounding in her chest, and rounded the corner of the house. That's when she saw him. A little boy, no older than 6, struggling to free himself from the grip of a man dressed in all black. Sophia didn't hesitate. She wasn't sure if it was her motherly instincts kicking in or just pure adrenaline, but she charged at the man with everything she had. The man, caught off guard, released the boy and turned to face her, but it was too late. Sophia tackled him to the ground, using the self-defense moves she had learned during her time in prison. The man fought back, but Sophia was relentless, fueled by the desperate need to protect the child. The boy ran back into the house, screaming for help, as Sophia and the man wrestled on the ground. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, she managed to subdue him, pinning him to the ground just as the police arrived. They had been called by the boy's family, who had heard the commotion from inside the house. As the police took the man into custody, Sophia finally allowed herself to catch her breath. She was covered in dirt, her clothes were torn, and she could feel the bruises forming on her arms, but the boy was safe. That was all that mattered. The boy's parents came rushing out of the house, their faces pale with fear. When they saw their son unharmed, they were overcome with relief and gratitude. The mother, tears streaming down her face, hugged her son tightly, while the father turned to Sophia, his expression a mix of shock and admiration. He asked her what happened, and Sophia explained everything, from hearing the screams to tackling the man. She could tell the father was trying to process the situation, but his focus kept shifting back to his son, who was now clinging to his mother. The police finished questioning her and took her statement before finally letting her go. The whole ordeal had taken less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. Sophia just wanted to go home, take a long shower, and try to forget about the day's events. She didn't need any more drama in her life. But as she turned to leave, the father stopped her. He thanked her profusely, telling her that she had saved his son's life. He asked if there was anything he could do to repay her, but Sophia shook her head. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because it was the right thing to do. The father insisted that she come inside, at least for a moment, to rest and have something to drink. Sophia was hesitant, but the adrenaline was wearing off, and she realized how exhausted she was. She nodded and followed the family into the house. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than she imagined. Everything was pristine, from the polished marble floors to the ornate chandeliers hanging from the ceilings. She felt out of place in her dirty, disheveled state, but the family didn't seem to notice. They led her to a sitting room and offered her a glass of water, which she gratefully accepted. As she sat there, trying to wrap her head around everything that had happened, something on the wall caught her eye. It was a portrait, large and beautifully framed, hanging above the fireplace. But what stopped her in her tracks was the fact that the woman in the portrait looked exactly like her. Sophia stared at the painting, her mind racing. The resemblance was uncanny. It wasn't just a vague similarity. It was as if someone had painted her likeness. But how could that be? She had never been in this house before, and she certainly hadn't posed for any portraits. She felt a chill run down her spine. The father noticed her staring at the portrait and followed her gaze. He asked if something was wrong, and Sophia, still in shock, pointed to the painting and asked who the woman was. The father's face grew somber as he explained that the woman in the portrait was his late wife, who had passed away several years ago. He told Sophia that she bore a striking resemblance to her, something that he hadn't noticed until she pointed it out. Sophia's mind was reeling. She had heard stories about doppelgangers, but she never thought she would encounter something like this in real life. The coincidence was too strange to ignore, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. The father, seeing her discomfort, assured her that it was just a bizarre coincidence, nothing more. He didn't want her to feel uneasy, especially after what she had done for his family. He thanked her again for her bravery and offered to drive her home, but Sophia declined. She needed some time to process everything that had happened. As she left the mansion and drove back to her small apartment, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the portrait. It was like looking into a mirror, but it wasn't her reflection. It was someone else's life, someone else's story, but somehow it was connected to her. She couldn't explain it, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Over the next few days, the events of that afternoon replayed in her mind over and over. She tried to push it aside, telling herself it was just a weird coincidence, but the image of the portrait haunted her. She found herself dreaming about it, waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, the woman's face, her face, etched into her memory. She knew she couldn't ignore it forever. There was something about that portrait, something about the woman in it, that she needed to understand. But where would she even start? She had no connection to the family, no way to learn more about the woman in the painting. All she had were her questions and a growing sense of unease. Sophia decided to do some research. She started with the basics, searching for information about the family online. It didn't take long to find out that they were one of the wealthiest families in the city. Their fortune built on a successful business empire that had been passed down through generations. But there was little information about the late wife, other than a few mentions in society pages and an obituary that offered few details. The more she searched, the more questions she had. Why did the woman look so much like her? Was it just a fluke? Or was there something more to it? She couldn't help but wonder if there was some connection between them, something that had been hidden or forgotten. Days turned into weeks, and Sophia found herself growing more obsessed with the mystery. She returned to the neighborhood several times, driving past the mansion, but she never had the courage to stop. What would she even say? "Hi, I look like your dead wife. Can we talk about it?" It was absurd, and yet she couldn't let it go. One day, while on her delivery route, Sophia noticed something she hadn't before. A small, secluded cemetery at the edge of the neighborhood, hidden behind tall, wrought iron gates. On a whim, she decided to stop and take a look. It was quiet, almost serene, with rows of old headstones shaded by towering trees. As she walked through the cemetery, she came across a newer section, where the headstones were more polished and the names more recognizable. And then, she saw it, the grave of the woman from the portrait. The headstone was simple but elegant, engraved with her name and the dates of her birth and death. Sophia stood there for a long time, staring at the grave. She felt a strange connection to the woman, even though she had never met her. It was as if their lives were intertwined in some way, like two threads in the same tapestry. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she had to find out more. After that, Sophia became determined to uncover the truth. She reached out to people who had known the family, visited archives, and even contacted a private investigator. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she couldn't stop until she found it. And then one day she did. It was a letter, tucked away in an old family Bible that had been passed down through generations. The letter was addressed to the woman in the portrait, written by her grandmother many years ago. In it, the grandmother spoke of a secret, a child born out of wedlock and given up for adoption to protect the family's reputation. The child, it seemed, had been lost to history until now. Sophia read the letter over and over, her hands trembling. It all made sense now, the resemblance, the connection she felt. She was the descendant of that child, a long-lost branch of the family tree that had been forgotten, hidden away in the shadows. And now she had found her way back. The revelation was both shocking and comforting. For so long, Sophia had felt like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. But now, she knew where she came from, and it gave her a sense of identity she had never known before. She wasn't just an ex-con, trying to rebuild her life. She was part of something bigger, a legacy that stretched back generations. Sophia decided to visit the family one last time. She didn't know how they would react, or if they would even believe her, but she felt like she owed it to them, and to herself, to tell them the truth. She wasn't looking for money or status. She just wanted to close the chapter on this strange, unexpected journey. When she arrived at the mansion, the father greeted her warmly, though he looked surprised to see her. She explained everything, from the portrait to the letter, and watched as his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to understanding. He didn't say much at first, just listened quietly, nodding as she spoke. Finally, he stood up and walked over to the portrait, gazing at it for a long time. Then, he turned to Sophia and told her that she was welcome in their home anytime. He didn't know what the future held, or how their relationship would evolve, but he was willing to explore it, one step at a time. Sophia left the mansion that day with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The mystery had been solved, and while it didn't change her past, it gave her a new perspective on her future. She wasn't just starting over. She was continuing a story that had begun long before she was born. And as she drove away, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that sometimes, life's strangest twists lead to the most unexpected and beautiful connections.